So, hey, it's good to see everybody here this afternoon. I'm Jason Odell, and I wanted to open this up to just a little casual conversation about what I'm shooting with these days because things have changed over the years. Just a little bit of housekeeping first. Um, this is all my info. My website is luminescentphoto.com. If you don't already know, I've had a podcast with Rick Walker since 2005 called the Image Doctors Photography Podcast. You can find us at imagedoctorsphoto.com. We've got some stuff coming up. Um, my Facebook is JP Odell Photo, and I just made a Blue Sky account because that seems to be where everybody is hanging out these days. So you can find me at luminescentphoto.com on Blue Sky if you're interested. So, just a little background. As a photographer, um, the worst thing you can do, generally speaking, is switch systems. It's not a smart idea typically. It's certainly not going to be profitable. You need a really good reason because there's a lot of investment in not just your camera, but all the other stuff, right? Lenses and flashes and whatever. So I have shot Nikon pretty much exclusively, dabbled in a few other things since 1987. I was a Nikon shooter. And in 2003, or no, excuse me, in 2002, um, one of the things that happened was the Nikon Z9 came out. And this is a wonderful camera, fantastic. And I got it early. Right at the beginning of like January of 2002, I got the camera and I was shooting birds with it. It's got all the fancy high tech everything in it. And I was doing bird workshops, but I also went to Croatia. I do travel photography workshops, if you didn't already know this. And I was invited along on a Croatian cruise to help be a photo pro, if you will, on the trip. And I brought my kit. It was the Z9. I had a 24 to 120 f4 lens and my Z6, which was converted to infrared because I love doing infrared photography. This is Dubrovnik, by the way, shot with my Z9. Um, I had a little 40 millimeter f2 lens, and together that whole kit weighed, I don't know, like 7 or 8 pounds, something crazy like that. Um, and then in the spring of 2023, so last year, um, I went to Panama, and I do this trip almost every year. I just got back from this year's trip actually, and again, I had the Z9. It was awesome, and had the Z9. I had a 100 to 400 lens because that was the most compact zoom you could get for the Z system at the time. The Some of the other lenses that are out now hadn't come out yet. I was using a 1.4 X teleconverter. Um, and that kit weighed about 6.5 pounds. Um, Pretty typical for a full frame kit, and it has all the, like I said, it had all the good stuff. But in order for me to get the kind of reach that I needed, um, I was shooting with a teleconverter, meaning that most of the time I was now hampered by shooting everything at f8, which means you need higher ISO. And to get the extra reach, I was using the DX crop mode a lot, just cropping in. Um, and if you use DX crop on a Nikon Z9 or Z7 II, one of the full frame Z8 full frame cameras, you end up with about a 19 megapixel image, which isn't bad, of course, but you are definitely, you're not taking advantage of the entire full frame. And and so what also happened on this trip is that my dad came along. It is a funny story. Um, so back in 2020, let's see, I want to say 2021 or 22, I had my in 2019, actually, my parents were going on a trip and they wanted a small system. My dad had a D500 Nikon and some lenses that he used for wildlife photography. And the funny thing was, I said, listen, you want something smaller, take a look at Olympus OM system because they've got much smaller cameras. And for, traipsing around Europe for 2 weeks like they were going to, you don't want to be lugging around a DX Nikon kit. It just didn't make any sense. So he did. And then he said, I was thinking about upgrading. And at this point, OM system had just released the new OM1 camera, which is a small body, professional, everything in it, subject detection, all this stuff. And I said, Dad, if I'm you, don't worry about waiting for a Nikon upgrade. Just get this Olympus camera, this OM camera, and sell your Nikon stuff. And so he did. And so he came with me on this trip, and his kit was the OM1 and a 100 to 400 millimeter lens. And it weighed 4 pounds. So that's 40% lighter than what I was lugging around. And he had the reach natively without any teleconverters to get out to 800 millimeters because the micro four thirds, which is what OM system cameras are, as well as Panasonic, although four thirds cameras, they are effectively a 2x crop from full frame. So he's shooting or not DX. He's shooting micro four thirds, and he's getting 20 megapixel images that look just as good as mine from a Nikon Z9 that cost way more and was 40% heavier in terms of the kit. And I said, man, I got to really start thinking about this. So another thing that was happening at the same time is I would occasionally run into my clients who had OM system cameras, and they were like, "Look at this thing! It's tiny, and I'm using this lens, and it's great for wildlife, all this good stuff." And I was like, "Wow!" So I see my clients sort of shifting there. So I decided there was a sale in April of last year, and I said, "Oh, let me just get an OM1 and a couple of lenses for a wildlife, oriented kit, and maybe some casual photography." And so I did. I got that, and within 3 or 4 months, that's all I was really shooting with at that point. Nikon came out with the Z8, and I decided, this camera does everything that I want it to do as far as where I am trying to make a living, which is teaching about wildlife and bird photography and taking people on travel photography tours. That's 90% of what I do. And the lineup in that system was such that there was a lens choice for pretty much anything you want. You want, small primes or big telephoto zooms or whatever. So I just started selling piece by piece Nikon things, which again is not something you normally do when you're a professional photographer. That's just not what you want. So replacing it with that system. So what did I end up with? I ended up with a full-on OM system kit. Now, I chose it for a lot of reasons. Like I said, I've been eyeballing it for several years. I've been recommending it to people casually who weren't heavily invested in another system, right? This is a good thing. But I chose the OM system for a couple of reasons. I decided to get it for a couple of reasons. Okay, because again, I was not unhappy with my Nikon equipment. Let me be very clear. I don't want to be tribal about this. Nikon makes good stuff. Canon makes great stuff. Sony makes great stuff. Everybody makes good cameras these days. So what I was looking for had to check certain boxes. So a big thing was the size and the form factor. Obviously, micro four thirds cameras tend to be smaller, but one corollary to that is that you can always make things bigger, and I'll talk about that. But the OM1 and the OM1 Mark II use a completely modern sensor. This is not like an old technology CCD or something like that, just because it's a smaller sensor. It's a stacked backside illuminated sensor. That's what all the big boys have. Same thing. That means you can use the electronic shutter pretty much exclusively. You're not going to get those weird rolling shutter artifacts and such. So that's a good thing. I love the electronic shutter because it's basically silent. That's a good thing. It had all of the same subject detection features in the autofocus that my Z9 had, give or take. People, birds, animals, trains, planes, automobiles, all that stuff. It had it in there. So I wasn't giving that up because that for me as a wildlife photographer is a huge, huge feature. You just don't want to live without that once you've had it. So that's something that I really, really liked because it had that. And then the lens array is tremendous. These system has been on the market for a really long time. I mean, Olympus slash OM Systems, Panasonic Micro Four Thirds, they've been out for, 15 years or so now. They've been around for a really long time. So the lenses are good. They're excellent optics. There's a tremendous variety. You can pick anything from teeny little prime lenses to monster telephoto zooms, and everything in between. So you can mix and match your kits based on what you want. And there's a lot of lenses out there on the secondary market, i.e., used. And I've bought a lot of my gear on the used market because you'll save 30, 40% sometimes over buying it new. So that's really awesome. Okay. So what I discovered when I did this is kind of funny. What I discovered was that first of all, my kit got a lot smaller and lighter. I mean, no brainer there. Okay. Um, and like I said, you can make a small camera larger, but you can't really make a large camera smaller. That Z9 that I was using was like I said, it's a great camera, but it is also a tank. It is a 3 pound thing. So you know, the features in the system that I like, not to be, too much on tech, but it's got really good stabilization, what's called IBIS in body image stabilization system. So even, non-stabilized lenses, you'll get anti-shake in there. And that means I'm able to hand hold in a tremendous uh, majority of my shooting situations. Even in low light indoors, whatever, I don't need a tripod most of the time. When I do use a tripod, it's because I'm deliberately trying to do like super long exposures, five, couple seconds long, 5, 10 seconds, whatever, stars or, night sky stuff. Um, the computational features that are in OM system cameras, and the biggest example, the one I use the most, is something called Live ND. It's a virtual solid ND filter that's done in camera. It gives me creative options in the field that I can set to a function button that in the past I would have had to, put filters on the camera. So I want to go through some case studies. Just rather than sit here and talk tech, I can hold things up for you. But let me actually go into some case studies to just show you the pictures that I'm getting with my system, and I'll talk about the kit that I was using. Okay, so that to me is really what I'm here to do, is just to show that I'm happy with stuff, and I'll let the photos speak for themselves. Hopefully, you'll like that. And yeah, this last little point that, depending on what lenses that I choose in my bag, you know, dirty little secret, photographers say they just need two lenses and they go out and buy about eight, right? I mean, we do that. And with things being affordable on the used market, you know, you can get a lot of lenses. And one other thing, I travel a lot. Typically when I travel on a plane, it meant camera backpack was large enough, it goes in the overhead bin, and then, maybe a little computer bag or whatever, under the seat. Now a lot of times when I'm traveling, I can fit my entire camera kit under the seat, and I can put a regular roller suitcase in the overhead bin, which makes traveling really, really more streamlined. So that's just a thing I've discovered. So I want to talk about some case studies, um, and I'll show what I was using for each one. Um, and on the first one, um, the first case study is Alaska. Okay, and I used my OM1 body. This was the first real trip that I did. I took a group on an Alaskan cruise last summer, or summer of 23. I brought two lenses. That was it. That was my entire kit. So I had the OM1 body, which is this fairly, it's a normal, it's not that much smaller than say a Nikon Z6. It's a little bit smaller. It's comparable in size to the Nikon Z6 or the Sony A1, the Alpha 1, a little bit smaller. But there's pretty small, fairly small sensor in there, but that has some benefits that we'll talk about. The two lenses that I brought were the 12 to 100 f4. which is this lens. So it's not tiny, but it's a 24 to 200 equivalent. I mentioned earlier, micro four thirds is effectively a 2x crop from a 35 millimeter full frame. So 12 to 100, it's a 24 to 200, constant f4 zoom, fabulously sharp lens. I love it. And if you were to just walk around with one lens, um, and you didn't mind that it's not absolutely a featherweight, this lens is pretty darn good. The other lens I brought because I knew we were going to Denali was the 100 to 400 f5 to 6.3. And that lens is this one. Now, I mentioned I had a Nikon 100 to 400, which is bigger than this one a little bit, certainly heavier. This is a 2.5 pound lens, maybe just under 3 pounds. It's not super light, but again, this is a 200 to 800 equivalent natively without any teleconverters or anything like that. It's a lens design that works quite well. It has, doesn't have internal zoom or fancy stuff like that, but it's also extremely affordable on the used market. You can get one of these for under $900. Show me an 800 millimeter equivalent that you can get for that kind of price. That's hard to do. So that was my two lens kit for Alaska. So I want to share some Alaska photos. Let me go into, I'm going to do this in my Lightroom catalog because that way I can remind myself what my settings were. So I shot this from Anchorage from the hotel room with that long 100 to 400, just looking out. There was a boat out there. You can see the mountain range in the distance. This was in August of 2023. So we did that. And then we went into Denali. We took the train up there. And I put this shot up because this was shot out of the window of the bus. When you go into Denali, you're in those school buses, if anyone's ever done that. And so this was with that 100 to 400 at what does it say? 342. So that's about 685 millimeter equivalent. This is a willow ptarmigan. And if you look up there in the upper left corner where I've got some of the shooting data, I shot this at ISO 12,800. Now, one of the knocks on micro four thirds cameras is, well, if you got a small sensor, you're going to get too much noise. That it just won't be good. You won't get enough usable shots. Well, full disclosure, I used a tool like DxO Pure Raw, which cleans up the noise completely. And I have no issues with this photo. You may take exception to, the composition or whatever, but 12,800 ISO cleans right up. I'm happy with this. This is not a problem for me. Okay. So that's one. And just, we saw a grizzly bear, same lens. This was ISO 1600, shot at the full 400 millimeters out the window of the bus. So this is 800. And I probably cropped in on this one just to be, full disclosure. Fun things. I kicked in that um, virtual solid ND filter, and I did a zoom blur from the back of the cruise ship. So this is half a second. It was at f11 at base ISO 200, and I just zoomed the lens. This was with that 12 to 100, and you can see it makes that cool effect. But it's not all blurry due to camera shake. It's blurry due to just a longer exposure. So the zoom blur here was intentional. I'll have more of these um, in a few more slides. Okay, you're in the Alaska cruise. You go up to Glacier Bay. This is where that 100 to 400 came in perfectly handy. Here's one of the glaciers. This one was shot at, just under 200 millimeters. So, around 380, 400 millimeters equivalent. No issues with that. Perfectly well, this is all handheld. We took the train, the Yukon train at the White Pass. So this is me leaning out of the train with that 12 to 100 shot at 16. So that's 32 millimeter equivalent in full frame land. Works just fine. We saw whales. So this is with that 100 to 400 again, full reach. Saw the humpbacks. Now this one was cool. So we were in I believe, Ketchikan, which is one of the stops. If you ever do that Alaska cruise, there's the stops that you go to. And it was salmon run season. So this is the stream that runs right through town. And the salmon were jumping up the ladder. They're going up the stream. They're doing their thing. And this is one of those things where you really cannot time this well. You're looking through the viewfinder and then you see, every now and then a fish appears, right? What do you do? So in this particular instance, I enabled the what Olympus or OM calls pro capture. Other people call it pre-burst capture. Basically, what it does is if you half press the shutter, the camera starts buffering frames. And then you release the shutter, you press it down all the way, you take your burst, and you can set it up so that a certain number or duration of time, certain number of frames are captured and stored in the memory from that buffer from before you press the button. Well, that's cool because that means now all I had to do was wait for the fish to appear in the viewfinder, press the button, and I was not only capturing that moment and the burst, but 4, 5, 6 frames from before. So then I had the fish, I could just pick the one that I wanted to. And one thing that is pretty nice about OM cameras in this particular case was that other manufacturers do have this feature. This is not unique, but what is unique is that the OM1 will do it in RAW, whereas my Z9, for example, required me to shoot JPEG to get use of that feature, and I just happen to like shooting RAW. So anyway, um, this is just another, we're walking around. I've got the 12 to 100. It's your all-purpose walk-around lens. So that was stuff, we'd see in the harbor there in on the Alaska cruise. So I had this two lens kit. Now from here, um, I took a group to Prague, Vienna, and then a cruise along the Danube for Christmas time. This was last December. And on this one, my kit was a little bit larger, but a different kit. So I still had my OM1 body, but then I complemented it with a couple of lenses that were deliberately chosen to be a smaller kit. I'm going around Europe. I don't need crazy reach, right? So what did I bring? One lens that I brought was the Olympus 12 to 45 f4 Pro lens, and that's this guy. It's tiny. This is a 24 to 90 f4 equivalent. Okay. So it's not as fast. It's not, it's an f4, but that's fine. It's deadly sharp edge to edge, no complaints. But this was my workhorse on that trip. So this was, you walk around streets in Europe, 24 to 90, that is almost all you need. But I did, of course, bring a few other things. So I threw in a prime because I could. And that prime was a 50 millimeter equivalent. It's the 25 millimeter. Now look how small this guy is. This lens is not a guy. There's no gender associated with this lens. This lens is tiny, and what I love about it is that I pay virtually no penalty whatsoever for putting it in my bag. Okay, so it's in the bag. I can use it in low light situations or for the occasional, shallow depth of field. It's a 1/8 aperture, so that's pretty nice. For something a little bit longer, because I did want to have a little extra reach at times, although I didn't use it a lot, I bought the 40 to 150 f4. So another constant f4 lens, weather sealed, all the good stuff. It extends out a little bit. Once it extends, it doesn't change its length while you're zooming it. It's an 80 to 300 equivalent, so there's a pair. So I've got 24 to 90, 80 to 300, two lenses, throw in a few little extra things just for fun because I wanted to. I have this little, now Panasonic makes micro four thirds lenses too. They also work on Olympus and vice versa. This is their 9 millimeter f1.7. So it's an 18 millimeter fast prime. So the occasional I wanted to go wider, I had this lens with me. But this weighs, 200 grams. It just doesn't weigh much. So not a big deal. So let's look at some of the photos I got with that kit on this trip down the Danube. So here is Prague. We took one of those boat, boat tours along the river. This is with the 40 to 150. So I got that nice compression and I shot it at, yeah, 60 millimeters. This is about 120 equivalent. Here's an indoor shot. Um, Handheld. You're not allowed to bring tripods in these cathedrals in Europe. They frown upon that. So I'm handheld. This is a tenth of a second. Base ISO f5. Now, I mentioned that Micro Four Thirds has twice the focal length, compared to 35 millimeter. It also has twice the effective depth of field. So my f4 lens gives the results of shooting at f8. Most of the time, this is not a problem. So here's f5. So this is like shooting a Nikon or Canon or Sony full frame at f10, which you would not do inside and handheld hold this. Otherwise, you'd be at, crazy ISO land. So here I am shooting at the equivalent of f10, but I'm at my base ISO. I'm using that stabilizer in the body. Absolutely sharp, 24 millimeter equivalent here. No issues whatsoever. Now, I mentioned that stabilizer. It's really, really good. So I wanted to try this. I used that live ND, that virtual neutral density filter, and you can select between, two to, I think, five or six stops effectively. I found that if you lean up against a street sign or a post, you can do some amazing handheld stuff, especially if you're shooting relatively wide. This is handheld. I'm not using a tripod. It's the traffic going by, this is in Prague, and I shot 2 seconds, 2 second exposure, to get those streaks from the lights. Pretty cool. And I don't need to screw on a filter to do this. I just configured a button to enable that mode, and off we went. Shooting at the blue hour, again, handheld, no tripod. I'm at easily hand holding this at a quarter of a second, no problem. Wide open f4. ISO bumped up a little bit, 500, but you're still in the absolutely, clean zone of anything. Not a problem here. So walking along the bridge, this is again in Prague, one night on a very cold December evening. Now, this shot I threw in here because this is in Vienna. This was the only shot I used my tripod on the entire trip. And why? Because I wanted to go really long and get those trailing lights from the cars. And this is actually a composite of two exposures that I blended together in Photoshop, but both were long. These were 15-second exposures. Now, I'm good, but I'm not 15 seconds handheld good. Okay. So there are limits to this. And so, I had a travel tripod, and this was with the that little 12 to 45 millimeter lens. You can see it's just absolutely sharp. Very, very nice look here at the blue hour. Now, I want to mention that again because sometimes people get in the way. I hate that. I don't mind shooting on street photography, but I'm not a street photographer. I don't do people so well. And what do you do when it's kind of gloomy and you've got these nice colorful buildings, and there's a lot of people? It was rush hour, it was people getting off work. Well, this is a handheld exposure, 1 full second long, base ISO at 20 millimeters. So this is 40 millimeter equivalent. And you can see those people get blurred in the foreground and they become far less distracting elements because you're looking now, you know that there's people there, but they give that illusion of movement and you're looking at the buildings more strongly. And we can have a little zoom blur fun. This was in the Christmas market in Nuremberg, I believe. So, I just did a little zoom, quarter of a second exposure, no big deal. Okay. I then went to earlier this year, I went to do my annual birding trip to San Diego, La Jolla area. I had my OM1. I had the 100 to 400. I also had purchased the 300 millimeter f4 Pro, which I unfortunately no longer have, but it's actually not much different in size than this. It's a little bit heavier, but it's a prime. It's deadly sharp, and it has the advantage of being able to easily use teleconverters. And with some of these lenses, like the 300, the 12 to 100, just like with other manufacturers, they will do multi-axis synchronized stabilization, whereby the lens has a stabilizer and the body has a stabilizer, and they work together. And when you do that with some of these lenses, you can get like ridiculous, like 7, 8 stops equivalent of stabilization, depending how you use it. So I also brought a little teleconverter, which is a tiny little thing, and I had that just to have fun with. So on that trip, let's go through some of these shots. Here's one with that 300 millimeter. So this is a 600 f4 equivalent. Here comes that pelican coming right at me. Little black turnstone here. Nice bokeh. This was with the 100 to 400. The seals on the beach, they hang out there, the harbor seals. This is also with the 100 to 400. A Brandt's cormorant. This is where having a zoom is good because you can be right on top of these and you want to be able to pull back. The 300 was actually too long most of the time I was using it. Here's that Brandt's cormorant again, but this time it's in flight. This is with the 100 to 400 zoom. Absolutely tack sharp. Bird AF works wonderfully well with this. ISO 3200, again, not noisy. Here's a kingfisher that we happen to see. You don't always see them, but when you get up close. So this one was ISO 6400 with the 100 to 400 at full reach, and I cropped in on that on top of it. And of course, you can't leave a shot without a pretty wood duck in the picture too. So they were there. So that was last January. Then some friends of ours, some colleagues of mine, we took a little trip to Cuba, to Havana. And on that trip, again, you want to go kind of light, and that's exactly what I did. I had the OM1 body again. I had the 12 to 100. So where was that one? Wherever I put it. Yeah. So here's my 12 to 100. This is my bread and butter on that trip. 24 to 200. Okay. Now I did want to have the possibility of some prime lenses for possible street shooting, some faster primes, maybe some portrait stuff, right? So I brought a 17 millimeter lens. You can see how big this one is. This is a 1.8. So this is the equivalent of a 36 millimeter lens. You can see it doesn't take up a lot of space in the bag, so I like it. And then I also brought that 25 millimeter f1.8 that I showed you earlier. So two little tiny primes, as well as the um, well, I maybe even brought the 45 millimeter. We'll see. I've got another prime lens that I may or may not have used. So let's go and look at the photos from Cuba. So this is down on the waterfront, the Malecon in Havana. Blue hour, it's getting dark. Quarter of a second handheld exposure using that 12 to 100 millimeter zoom lens. I like my long exposures. So again, that virtual ND filter is fantastic. So here's one of those classic Chevys driving by, quarter of a second handheld exposure, base ISO. Here's the Capital. This again with a 12 to 100. Some, now the people in Cuba are, again, I'm not much of a people photographer, but these kids were too cute to pass up. This was with the 12 to 100. This is also with the 12 to 100. If anyone's been to Cuba knows that these ladies are all around. They dress up and they've got their cigars. They walk around the historical district in Havana. This is your typical street scene with the Capitol in the distance. This is with the 12 to 100. Got to do the classic cars, right? So that zoom lens lets me get in tight, which is nice. And I can also go wide. So this was that same lens. We went to a tobacco farm, did a portrait of this guy. You definitely want to buy a cigar from him. You don't want to mess with this guy. Now he was great. Also with the 12 to 100, it was dark in there. It was a kind of a shack that we were in, a little building. ISO 3200, no problem with the system. And then here I used a 45 millimeter 1.8, which is I call it Malibu Barbie's portrait lens because this thing is so small. This is a 90 millimeter portrait lens equivalent. And you can see that even with uh, the greater effective depth of field, so at 1.8, this was shot at f2. So this would be like shooting your prime, your 35 millimeter full frame lens at f4. The bokeh looks fine. There's no issues here. No one's going to say, "Did you shoot that with a?" No one's going to ask me what format camera I used for the photo. Hopefully, they just say nice photo. This was the grandmother at one of the Airbnbs we stayed with in Cuba. She was wonderful. Okay. Then took a trip, did a workshop with my podcast partner, Rick Walker, to the Redwoods in far northern California and also the southern Oregon coast. Now, this I brought a lot of stuff because I was doing a workshop and I wanted to have a bunch of different things, but it was still a small enough kit that fit in a bag that fit under the seat of the plane. So I brought the OM1. By this time, I had upgraded it to the Mark II version, which came out earlier this year. And the I also brought a I picked up a used Olympus, what's called the OMD EM5 Mark II. And this thing I had converted to infrared. It's also very nice, very, all metal, very, very nice camera. I had it converted to infrared. It's a little older. It doesn't have all the fancy autofocus, but for that, I don't need it. Um, and on it, I have a little compact power zoom. It's a 14 to 42 millimeter zoom lens, which equates to a 28 to 85, 84 or and change, which is a very nice walk around focal length range for infrared. I also had my 12 to 100, which I showed you before. I had a different wide lens, and that's this one. This is the 8 to 25 f4. Very sharp, not small. It's very much metal. But this one is unique in that it has a very cool range. It's a 16 to 50 range, which means you can leave it on your camera a lot longer than if you were shooting with like a 14 to 24 or a 14 or a 16 to 35. That extra reach on the long end can come in handy for street photography, and it's really, really sharp. So that was kind of cool. And then I have another wide lens that I got, which is good for infrared. The other two lenses weren't so great for infrared, but I got this tiny wide angle zoom. It is the 9 to 18 f4 to 5.6. So it works great and visible too, but it works with IR. So I had an IR kit with two lenses. I had a visible kit with two lenses. And just for fun, I threw in a macro lens. Why? Because the 60 millimeter macro is also extremely small. So this didn't take up very much room in my bag whatsoever. And I use it because we came across a few banana slugs and stuff like that. So that was my kit on that trip. And let's look at some of the photos. Oh, that's also from Cuba. Sorry. I left one out, the laundry. Okay, so here's our redwoods. Now this was a bracketed HDR because it needed to be. It was dark in there and they had the sunbeams coming through, but fun shot. And I did use a tripod just because we were using tripods. And if you're doing HDR, it's useful to have a tripod. The the rhododendrons were blooming in places. Here's a shot from the southern Oregon coast. This is kind of a long exposure. This is 5 seconds. So again, all I was using was a polarizing filter and that live ND feature, that virtual neutral density features. I got a 5 second exposure, no problem. I did use a tripod though. Close-ups. Now it was dark in the forest with the redwood, so this was ISO 10,000. Again, it cleans right up. No issues with the modern tools. And here's some infrared photos from around that area. This was in Crescent City. There's another infrared shot. So this is with the other camera. And your obligatory sunset parting shot from our last night on the safari. This was with that 12 to 100 lens. Moving on from California, I took a little scouting trip out to New York, mostly to go to Long Island for birding. But I did meet up with some friends and we did some little photo walk in Brooklyn. This was shot from the Manhattan Bridge in Brooklyn down in Dumbo. What was my kit? My OM1 Mark II body, 100 to 400 that I mentioned, the 300 f4 that I no longer own, and I'll explain why in a minute. my teleconverters, and I did want to have a walk around lens. So again, that little 12 to 45 was perfect because I didn't need the big camera bag. I just had a little sling bag that I could toss that in and walked around with it. So that was my one shot from Manhattan. The rest were birds. I was down on Long Island shooting birds, where I hope to go on a workshop if people are interested next July. And this is what you get. So this is with the 300 millimeter plus the 1.4 extender, and you got to get down kind of on your belly. But look at the bokeh; it's great, right? No, deadly sharp lens. No tripods here. I was just everything was handheld, no problem. These are the oyster catchers, and between the bird detection autofocus and the optics, you just the results are outstanding. This is like Angry Birds, the gull, and then you get the birds flying. The terns fly around. So you got terns, oyster catchers, skimmers. I don't have any skimmer pictures to share in this presentation, but they're all there and they're fun to shoot. And no problem when you're able to shoot at you know 10 25 frames a second. Even if you need it, you can push that with some of these new cameras, all with the electronic shutter. I got invited by another photographer, Matt Seuss, to be a co-leader on a workshop that he was putting together to go out to the Faroe Islands, and that's a cool spot. It's right in the middle of the North Atlantic, north of Scotland. To get there, we stopped in Iceland. So I'll have a few shots from Iceland. For this one, um, I brought a slightly different kit. It was only three lenses. It's all I really needed. And I brought the the larger F4 weather sealed pro glass because I'm leading a workshop. I wanted to have, absolute best quality of everything, but I could have done it with other lenses. There were other clients there that had different lenses as well. The OM1, the 8 to 25, and the 12 to 100. Those were my two primary lenses. But we were going to stop to photograph puffins. And so over the summer, I traded in that 300 and I bought the 150 to 400 f4.5 with the built-in teleconverter. Now, this is the biggest lens that you can get for the OM system. It is not small, but it's not crazy. It's 4 pounds. It's lighter than my old Nikon 200 to 500, which weighs over 5 pounds. It balances very well. It has internal zoom, so you see that nothing extends when you turn the zoom ring. It's got the crazy good stabilizer, and it has this extra neat little feature on the side where I've got the foot upside down, where it has this little lever on the side here. I don't know if you can see that, but this lever is a 1.25 teleconverter. So when you flip that down, this lens becomes a 500 millimeter f5.6. What does that mean in full frame land? That is 1,000 millimeters that you can hand hold, no issues. Okay. The only downside of that lens, besides that it is kind of big, it's not cheap. It's the most expensive lens that they have. So it's one that I've seen some of my clients have, but it's not one you see around a lot. The 100 to 400 is clearly the better value for the money for sure. But let's look at some of those photos from that trip. So this is in Iceland, walking around Reykjavik. I like, they got a lot of pride in Reykjavik, and this building demonstrated that. This was with my 12 to 100, walking around the waterfront in Reykjavik. Again, just wandering around it. Rained a little bit. I didn't worry about that. My camera was weather sealed. Here's the sun. I believe it's called the Sun Voyager, the classic sculpture. And you know what? In Iceland, everyone was really cool. There was like 30 or 30 plus people, but nobody climbed onto it like you would have here in the States. Everybody just let everyone take turns with their photos and nobody in the shot. It was really polite. I like that a lot. Um, you run into an Icelandic horse, they want to come and say hi. So I switched here to my, well, I was just using the 12 to 100. So this was at 12 millimeters, so 24. Just shot handheld, just get down and made a new friend that day. I mentioned the puffins. So this was with that 150 to 400 4.5. This was shot wide open, uh, absolutely tack sharp. That stabilizer was great. It was raining on us. I didn't put a rain cover on my camera. The system was weather sealed. It worked great. Here's one coming in with a beak full of fish. This is the kind of stuff that you want. And this is where your subject detection, your bird animal detection works really great, no matter what camera you have. It just happens to, be in this camera. It was one of my criteria, right? So I wanted to throw those in there that I shot that. Um, but then the rest of the trip, that big lens pretty much just stayed locked up in my hotel room because I knew I wasn't going to need it. So my lens kit became two lenses. I had the 8 to 25 and the 12 to 100. So that's a 16 to 200 range that I could walk around with. And so here's some of the shots that I got from that. This is with the 8 to 25, very long exposure here because it was dark. But I used that. I believe I had a polarizer, and I was just able to run it long. So this is a 40-second exposure. So yes, I did use a tripod here, for sure. But this one was handheld. This is 4 seconds. I braced myself, and it was 4 seconds handheld. I managed to pull this off without a tripod. This is one of the sod churches. They have the sod roof buildings. And this is with that 8 to 25. The wider you go, the longer you can hand hold things because it's just easier that way. Here's a shot from the beach at 20 millimeter equivalent, 10 millimeters with that wide lens. That was some of the trips from the shots from the Faroes, and I know we're running out of time, so let me just move forward. Went to Ireland. Um, Took a group on a tour of Ireland, and we did photography, we did sightseeing, we drank Guinness. It was all great. So for this, I wanted to go absolutely lightweight. I wanted to go small. And I discovered along the way that some of these lenses that worked really well for infrared, they're just fine on visible too because they're designed for it. So I used two lenses on this trip. I had both cameras, so I had my infrared and my OM1, but I had two lenses. The first one that I used was my just pretty much all-purpose everything, a 14 to 150 f4 to 5.6. All right, now this is small, right? Now it does extend, of course. Okay, but this is a 28 to 300 zoom, and it weighs nearly nothing. I'd have to look up the weight, but it's a couple of 300 grams maybe at most. It's under a pound. It's very, very light, and it works both with visible and with infrared. So I chose that. And then again, I had that wide option, which was that 9 to 18. So here in my hand here is my entire kit for this week-long trip to Ireland. I was actually gone for longer than that. Um, 18 to 300 total range in a shoulder bag that weighs nothing. And I could use both of them with my IR camera, which is particularly nice. So let's look at some photos from that trip. So this is up in Northern Ireland. Before I met my group, I went and hung out with my sister in Belfast or just outside of Belfast, and we took a little trip up to the Giant's Causeway, which, if this looks familiar, it's because this is where they photographed those children for Led Zeppelin's Houses of the Holy album cover. These are the basalt columns that form from volcanic activity, and this was handheld with the 9 to 18 millimeter lens, so all the way at its widest. And then we moved down to Dublin. These are with the 14 to 150, the kind of shooting you would do with travel. Okay, so here's one. These are all with the 14 to 150, just walking through the streets of Dublin. This was in Kilkenny. That's the castle there. I converted it to monochrome. It's not infrared, but this was with that 9 to 18 millimeter lens. Here's some infrared. This is Blarney Castle that I shot in IR. And just to show that you can get bokeh even with that extra depth of field, this was with the 14 to 150. If you do close-ups, you will get nice out of focus backgrounds. I promise. It's true. Here's an infrared shot um, from one of the I forgot the name of the place where we went. It was the garden. Here's some stuff along the coast on the Dingle Peninsula, again with that 14 to 150. And got my nice little starburst here. This is an HDR because you don't do shooting into the sun and not do HDR, but just walking around. This was handheld, no tripod. Um, there's a feature on the camera where if you set the camera to HDR bracketing, it just takes all the pictures with you press the shutter once, which is kind of nice. And of course, the Cliffs of Moher. I can't forget them. So this was also with that 14 to 150. Lastly, I just got back last month from Panama, my annual trip. Um, this one, again, I only brought three lenses. I brought my 12 to 45 for when we were in Panama City, just for casual stuff at the Panama Canal. The 150 to 400, the big white whale, I brought that for darn near everything. And I brought the 60 millimeter 2.8 macro. And I also brought a little speed light that I picked up. The Olympus ones are awfully darn expensive. I don't do enough flash photography that I felt justified in spending $300 on a flash. So I got this little flash. This is a Godox unit. Costs about 80 bucks or something like that. Worked perfectly well. It takes two AA batteries, and I use that for some of my macro photography. So let's look at some of these. This is Steve. I photographed Steve from a boat on the canal. I think I might have his picture in here elsewhere too. This was taken from a boat, handheld, 150 to 400 capuchin monkey. This was also taken from a boat on a canal trip. This is the Emerald Basilisk. This is with the 150 to 400 at its full extension for 400 millimeters. Here's my macro lens. Now this is the um, strawberry poison dart frog. Um, and I use my macro lens and I use that little flash that I showed you to get that to work. So that 60 millimeter macro is the equivalent of 120. There's Steve, our sloth, nice male with his breeding. That's his fur actually on his back there, that orange with the stripe. You don't usually see that, so that was lucky for us that we got fortunate. You can get real close with that. This is an 800 millimeter equivalent again. Will bumblebee, and sometimes the bird AF will find bees, and it says, "Oh, that looks enough like a bird. I'll focus on that," and it worked. And then here's the macro with the flash, a red-eyed tree frog. So that was pretty much the extent of my travels this past year. And just want to throw out there before we open it up for questions that I do have, I just want to throw out my schedule. It's all on my website. But I've got an online class next Monday on metering, on how I meter with mirrorless cameras these days, and why I don't use a light meter anymore, and use different techniques. I've got two spots left to join me in La Jolla, San Diego in January to get shots like this one of the pelicans and the cormorants and the wood ducks in breeding plumage. And then I've got a Florida birding workshop in early February. I'm going to Oregon with Rick Walker as part of the Image Doctors. We're doing our photo safari. It's going to be from Portland round trip, Columbia River Gorge, the waterfalls, and then out to the coast. And we'll go up and down the coast from Newport, Oregon, and then back to Portland. New York, Long Island, summer birding in July. I have three spaces left to join me for a epic 12-day photo adventure, sort of enthusiast adventure of Iceland, going around the entire ring road. That's in September. Like I said, three spots left. Private vehicle, um, includes all the hotels, all that good stuff. I'm still finalizing the pricing. I'm waiting to hear back from the Eco Lodge where I go to Panama, but I have dates blocked off for the 12th through 19th of October. And then another event with Rick Walker as part of the Image Doctors podcast. We're going to do a little fun California cruise October 25th to November 1st, which hits LA, San Francisco, Santa Barbara, San Diego, down to Ensenada, and back to LA. And it should be really fun. It's almost like a vacation for photographers. You bring your significant other. It's all good. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions, and hopefully you've all enjoyed this, and we'll see. So you can type the questions in the box, or I will You can also feel free to you can unmute yourself if you have another question. I'll just make that possible. Okay. So I'm just looking in my chat window now to see what I've got here. So the question is, and it's a great question, what have I given up making the transition from Nikon to OM system? The answer is effectively, I've given up 20 megapixels or 25. That's it. And I've given up a little bit of the extreme shallow depth of field, which is not a way that I normally shoot. So um, between uh, between the noise reduction tools and some of these things like Topaz Photo AI, where you can upres things, I can easily upscale my photos into the 24 plus or even more 40 megapixel range if I wanted to print them extremely large, which frankly I don't do much of, but it's an option. Um, and so that's, I gave up 20 plus megapixels and I gained, I feel like my camera bags are like those commercials where they say I lost 200 pounds and they're holding up their old jeans. They were like so huge. When I put my stuff in my camera bags now, it's like, oh my gosh, this bag is cavernous compared to what I have. So that was a good question. Another question: is the 14 to 150 millimeter your primary infrared lens now, and is it okay when you use it with DxO Pure RAW? Yes, that is pretty much that one. And if I wanted to go smaller, the that little 14 to this one, the 14 to 42. That those are my two primary ones. It really just depends on the kind of shooting. And yes, DxO Pure RAW it it sharpens them up. I mean, infrared has its own set of challenges, including edge sharpness. So you can do very well with that. But I don't get significant hot spots, and that's the key here. And it's not significantly, it's not any worse than what I was shooting with other infrared cameras. And yes, that is the follow-up question. Am I still using the 9 to 18? Yes, I am. So I've got an infrared kit that really spans three lenses depending on which ones I want to use. The 9 to 18, the 14 to 150, or the 14 to 42. Really just depends on what my mood is and what kind of range that I want and how small I want to make it. Anything else? So hey Carl, I did see your question. The Nikon Z 8 and 9 and maybe even the Z6 III, I can't remember. They do have the pre-capture, but it's not raw. So I was just reading what you were saying to me. I don't think I don't know if Canon or Sony have raw pre-capture either. It's if they do, they don't mention it in the specs. So I'm not going to comment on systems that I don't use. Okay, well, you know how to reach me. I'll send out a follow-up email as well with some info on, with links to where some of these items are as well. Um, a great question. Do I find the 150 to 400 to be a worthwhile purchase? Yes, but I wouldn't call it a cost-effective purchase. It's extremely effective, but my God, is a good lens. If you do a lot of birding, the 150 to 400 is tremendous. I can't say enough good things about it. Because one of the things you can also do with it is put a teleconverter on it. You can get all the way out to 2000 if you wanted to, which is kind of crazy for a handheld lens. It's just, I don't think it's priced well. To put it mildly, it is tremendously more expensive than anything else in the entire OM lineup. Um, and that makes it tough. On the other hand, they're starting to show up on the used market. You might be able to save some money there. There are some options. So Yeah. I just saw the comment that says mine arise tomorrow, price be damned. Yeah, no doubt, right? Sometimes you just got to do it. And if you're doing a lot of birding, it is really tough to beat that combination in terms of, the reach. It's extremely nimble, despite the fact that yes, it's 4 pounds, but it's very comparable to the offerings from Nikon, Canon, Sony in that same range. Only you're just getting extra reach. So it's all good. There was a question about my internal IR filters. They work just fine. They are from STC Optics, to answer your question. They just press into the mount and they work just fine. Um, we can talk about infrared at another time, but yeah, they work just great. So and they've also got a hot mirror filter, which is nice. So you can use that IR camera as a visible light backup if you just put the other hot mirror filter in there. So yeah, that's STC Optics makes little clip-in, press-in filters that are for infrared. All right. Well, if you got any other questions, drop me a line. My email is jason@luminescentphoto.com. You can find me online or message me. And I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone taking some time out of their Wednesday afternoon, evening. Go get at it and happy shooting. Have fun out there. Thanks.